The order that never came sits like a ghost on the channel. Sail. Somewhere along the occupied coast in the summer of 1940, a line of barges knocks softly against pilings, navies of the wrong size and the wrong shape pressed into the idea of an invasion. Behind them stand divisions that have not known a halt since May. Above them, the sky is the question. Hitler has given his war a new directive, defeating England, and for the first time, its answer does not lie in tanks rolling across a neighbor's border. It lies in the air. The camera opens on a different rhythm of battle. No thunder of panzers, no trodden mud. Instead, a headset settles over a young woman's hair. A pencil circles a green-lit blip on a plotting table at Bentley Priory. A coastal radar mast hums like a skeleton of iron and wind. A line of hurricanes bounces down a grass strip, their tires throwing dew into the morning. A Spitfire rises behind them, knife-bright. Across the water, the Luftwaffe warms engines in neat ranks, Heinkels and Dorniers, WAAFs, and the gull-winged Stukas. Men climb ladders into cockpits smelling of fuel and leather. A gunner slaps the canvas of his turret to settle nerves. In Berlin, a leader who trusts momentum more than nuance sets a clock by which an island must change its mind. The Battle of Britain is not just an air fight. It is a system meeting a storm. Britain has invented a way of seeing beyond the horizon. Chain-home radar towers netting the coastline. Listening posts that turn the air itself into a wire. The observer corps, counting and confirming. Filter rooms transforming noise into plots. Sector stations directing fighters like fingers, pointing precisely at a threat. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, quiet and exacting, has built an integrated defense that is less romantic than a squadron scramble and more decisive. It is not invincible. It is just enough, if used with the discipline of a mind that knows exactly what it cannot afford to lose. Across the channel, Gring promises Hitler the RAF will be beaten in weeks. The Luftwaffe carries confidence like a badge. It has just folded Norway and France into its map. It has learned that when German guns and German aircraft work together, an enemy's will dissolves. But the channel is a moat, not a mere strip of water. The Kriegsmarine is crippled from Norway and outmatched. The invasion, Operation Sea Lion, can exist only if the Luftwaffe becomes a temporary navy, if it can wipe the RAF from the sky, line Britain, and burn the Royal Navy off the water. The condition for everything else is air superiority. In the first skirmishes over convoys, the Kanalkampf, the war shrinks to lines of smoke on gray waves and twin dots that become two fighters spiraling like angry birds. A Ru-87 dives, siren screaming. A destroyer covers itself with splashes from its own guns. The RAF discovers that its Hurricanes, sturdy and thick-set, are tank killers of the sky-tearing bombers, apart with 8 guns, while the Spitfires tangle with escorts. Polish pilots, raw with loss and ferocious with purpose, enter the fight with a style that the phrase "by the book" cannot contain. Canadians, Czechs, South Africans, New Zealanders, free French accents mix in dispersal huts where tea cools faster than fear. Each day begins with the same almost domestic act, the weather forecast. Coastal fog buys the island hours. Clear blue skies purchase a terrible clarity. Engines cough. Chalkboards list readiness states. Pilots doze in deck hairs until a bell and a shout take decades off their lives. Scramble. Wheels thump over molehills and shadows flick like fish across hedgerows. The onward rush, the climb into air where the horizon is a thin wire and the sea is a mirror, lasts only minutes. And then the fight opens around them like a trap 109s darting from above with sun at their back, bombers plowing on in tight Vicks, gunners showing light across the blue in long, jittering seams. What makes this an air battle that changes a strategy forever is not a single glorious combat or a single wreck burning in a field. It is the slow discovery, in Berlin and in the clouds over Kent, that Britain will not be chased out of the air simply by aggression. The RAF does not rise everywhere all at once. It rises where it must, and only when it must. Dowding and Air Vice Marshal Keith Park of 11 Group refused to be lured into waste. The Luftwaffe's range is a leash Bf-109s over London, carry fuel for perhaps 10 minutes of high-power combat before the Channel demands its toll. The Bf-110, the vaunted Zersterer, proves too heavy, too slow to turn with single-seat fighters. And the Stuka, so terrible over Poland and France, becomes a museum piece under modern fighter guns. This is not the battlefield that Germany chose. This is the battlefield Britain prepared. But the margin is razor-thin. Factories hammer day and night to replace fighters. Training schools push men through faster than comfort allows. Ground crews sleep beneath wings, roused by the rubber smell of tires and the ache of hot engines in their bones. The WAAF plotters with their croupier's rakes slide counters across maps with a grace that hides the stakes. In rooms with blackout curtains, controllers' voices stay level as they vector men they've never met into numbered squares of sky. Above them all, a political war becomes personal. If the RAF holds, Operation Sea Lion stays a threat on paper. If it breaks, Britain's independence turns into a story you tell to grandchildren with a different ending. The stakes tighten until they make a sound like stretched wire. Hitler's strategy rests on the assumption that shock delivered quickly at scale forces capitulation. Here, over the island that refuses to be impressed by shock, he will learn otherwise. We hover at the edge of Eagle Day Adlertig when the Luftwaffe intends to knock the RAF out by striking airfields and radar. The sun lifts. 100 engines become 1,000. In the deep echo of that morning lies the hinge of a war. What if the sky can be commanded at will? What if it cannot? They name it Eagle Day because names, like medals, can make a plan feel inevitable. August 13th, 1940. The Luftwaffe's schedule of blows begins, complicated by English weather, delayed by fog, carried by confidence. Bombers lift from Pas d'Escalade and Normandy, from Belgium and Holland. Escorts climb into clear air, sleek with paint and arrogance. But plans tower at a height reality cannot reach. A navigational error jerks a formation off its mark. A clogged valve delays a drop. Sudden cloud cover swallows a target like a magician's scarf. Over the coast, radar aerials sweep and rehearse their tireless geometry. On glowing cathode screens, thin spikes of light stand and fall. The shapeless become shape. Many plots Calais to Dungeness Angels 20. Phones clack. Chalk scrawls. 11 Group launches squadrons to meet the first waves. The opening weeks are a schooling on both sides. The Luftwaffe tests the wires of Britain's defense. It sends Stukas to smash coastal radar masts, surprised when the steel towers refuse to be charred into impotence. The equipment is in concrete huts. The aerials are just bones. Ventnor goes dark on the Isle of Wight for a day, but the net reshapes around the gap, and the Germans, misreading Britain's silence as death rather than discretion, stop trying to blind a system they do not understand. they turn to airfields and sector stations. Here the map affects the blood. Biggin Hill, Kenley, Hornchurch, names written in chalk all summer suddenly write themselves in smoke. Rue 88s and Do 17s rake runways and smash hangars. He 111s drop weight through roofs into operations rooms, where voices direct lives in inches and seconds. At Manston, at Hawkinge, men fill craters with mattocks and shovels, while tires kick mud at their boots. Hurricanes take off between bomb craters, wheels lifting over startled work parties and tractors. The sky over the Thames estuary clots with battles that start as chess and end as wrestling. Bombers wallow under hits, escorts wheel to shake attackers off, the RAVs fighters dive, shoot, climb, and dive again in cycles that eat up petrol and nerve. A pattern hardens. Left to their own choices, the 109s would sweep forward as a hunting force-free Jad carving spaces for bombers to follow. Reichsmarshal Gring, nursing a need to display control, orders close escorts that shackle fighters to bombers' speed and course. The 109s can kill or they can guard. It is a choice that insults physics. With tanks topped off to cross the channel, they must fight and leave quickly. Many who stay to cover bombers stagger home on fumes, skimming waves, engines cutting out in fearsome coughs. RAF Fighter Command fights on two tempos at once. In the southeast, Park's 11 Group sends small, sharp formations to meet a raid just as it forms, cutting at the sinews rather than the fists. To the north, Trafford Lee Mallory's 12 Group experiments with a big wing, several squadrons forming to strike en masse. The argument attrition in small sips versus knockouts becomes heated in memos and in the gaps where one method needed the other's timing. Under the debate lies a simple pressure: time. Once radar plots a raid and a filter room decides it matters, fighters have minutes to climb, form, and place themselves correctly in 3 dimensions. A big wing that forms too late will cut only wake. On the ground, the unseen army pushes the odds. Women in blue uniforms push counters across a map and patch calls with fingers that will not be remembered by marble. Armorers, their hands black with cordite, slam fresh belts into the wings. Fitters change plugs and adjust cables with a speed that makes machines into partners. Recovery teams haul wrecks from fields, glancing away when they look too long like coffins. In factories, men and women rivet aluminum skin to ribs, spray dope onto fabric, and speak in numbers that, if you chant them right, sound like a spell. 320 Spitfires in July, 496 fighters turned out in August. By autumn, British production quietly outpaces German. And there are the pilots, who learn to be old very fast. Morning, scramble, climb. Somewhere in the haze, a formation grows like weather over the sea. First contact is speed and noise and confusion. Seconds later, you are bucking your head to see around the canopy frame, while a 109 flashes below, sleek and pale green, a black cross thick on its flank. You fire a 2-second burst at a bomber, and the wing root dissolves. You fire another, and the world is suddenly full of splinters and fabric, and a smell you will never forget. A tracer glances past your canopy and carves a line across the day that your brain completes into your own obituary. You pull into the sun and lose your wingman in the fizz of the air. You land shaking and discover your lips have fused to your teeth with thirst. Someone asks if you saw anything. You say, "A few," because words seem greedy at the wrong times. You go up again. On August 15th, the Luftwaffe tries the north. From Norway and Denmark, Luftwaffe sends bombers and discovers that even the long way round finds a net. 13 group in squadrons from 12 rise to meet them. The Luftwaffe suffers losses so hard, they do not try that road again. The greatest day, some call it. You could also call it the day Germany learned the map was smaller than it looked. By late August, the Stukas are withdrawn. Too many go in flames. The battle shifts into a harsher phase, with the Luftwaffe pressing attacks on sector stations. Biggin Hill takes blow after blow. Kenley's hangars burn. Debden and Northweald stagger. Repairs held together with timber and prayer keep operations rooms alive. Dowding's doctrine hold the pilots, accept the loss of planes. Looks like stinginess, until one remembers that an airframe can be replaced in weeks. A trained pilot is a year of invisible labor. In London, the government watches the reserve pools shrink. In Berlin, the Führer watches time slip, and with it the weather window for invasion. The English Channel develops its autumn moods. The barges below are not ships. They are ideas wearing hulls. Each day the RAF remains functional is a day the Navy might get a chance to swat them aside. Each day the Luftwaffe fails to smash sector control is a day fighter command can still make numbers dance. And then, on a night in late August, a German formation lost, careless, or both drops bombs on London. The bombs fall in the fields and rows of houses where people sleep. Windows blow inward. Bed frames tilt. A city wakes with a shout. Churchill, delighted to have the excuse he knew he would one day take, orders a reprisal on Berlin. The Rauf's night bombers find the city, and for the first time since his rise, Germans hear the war in their own streets. Hitler's pride stirs. Between these blows lies a pivot disguised as peak. Soon, the target list will change. The Luftwaffe's shift to London begins with a promise of clarity. Burn the city, break morale, draw fighter command up over the capital and crush it there. On September 7th, heavy raids roll up the Thames like man-made weather. The East End becomes a geography of fire. Warehouses and cranes, docklands and streets, with chairs still at tables. Barrage balloons hang like silver fruit enough to make Heinkels climb and spread. Searchlights stab white scenes into dusk. Anti-aircraft guns bark with a rhythm that becomes its own kind of liturgy. The river reflects a red that is not sunset. Civilians shove furniture onto carts and wheel it across pavements to nowhere in particular. Water mains burst, channels boil, firefighters in tin hats make a chain of hands and hoses and hope. For fighter command, London is a blade with two edges. Meeting raids over the capital means less time for 109s to run you down. But it also means the Luftwaffe has stopped smashing the sector stations that keep the defense running. Park and Dowding see the gift in the fury. The breathing space to repair, to rake runways flat, to replace telephones and maps and walls. Leam Allery's big wing, given more warning by 11 Group's early calls, forms more often now, and its great hammer blows messy, late, sometimes devastating, become part of the score. September 15 arrives bright and cold, a Sunday with church bells silent by order, so they can ring if invasion comes. 2 major raids come in daylight, and the sky over London fills with contrails and flashes, with the thick drumming of engines and the eccentric wobble of damaged machines. People stand in streets and watch dogfights staged for a city's raw nerves, tiny black peppering against a huge blue plate. Prime Minister Churchill visits 11 Group's operations room. and hears the calm voices that have become the nervous system of a country. "All right? Are you quite sure?" he asks when controllers commit their last reserves. They are sure because for once the arithmetic is on their side. By afternoon, German crews count new holes in a familiar story. Bombers fall in more numbers than their training ever asked them to imagine. 109s dive in, tear at the fighters, and peel away when the channel's leash tugs. Heinkels waddle home with one engine. Dorniers ditch in the sea, their crews bobbing in dinghies that are bright as toys from a cliff. In Berlin, the day is reported as a hard lesson delivered to England. In the RAV's ready rooms that night, men drink with the relief that is second cousin to grief. When the counts settle, the Luftwaffe has lost so much that something that had felt temporary slides toward the permanent. 2 days later, Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion. It will never unpostpone. And yet, for Londoners, postponement means little. The Blitz begins in earnest. Night after night, the Luftwaffe trades precision for volume, navigation for fear. Bombers fly by radio beams and gut. Families sleep in underground stations with sandwiches and stoicism. Platform concerts for morale are sown in smoke. Incendiaries fall like iron rain. Firestorms complete the work high explosive begins. Around bank vaults and cathedral domes, men stand on rooftops with stirrup pumps and sand, arguing with fire in a language that leaves hands raw and shoulders ruined. The dome of St. Paul's floats over a glowing city, a symbol because it did not go. The Blitz does what bombing always does. It hardens some hearts and breaks others. It kills randomly, and with a logic only statisticians understand. It builds love for a machine you cannot see, an air defense that seems to hold an umbrella over the dark. And it creates anger at an enemy known mostly by the sound of engines and the shape of shadows. For the RAF, the nights are mostly about endurance. Night fighters, awkward yet learning, Blenheims with ears too small, defiance with faith that lasts longer than luck grope, upward toward dots on a controller's scope. Ground-controlled interception and early airborne radar begin to nudge the odds. Anti-aircraft guns improve with better predictors and proximate fuses still to come. But this is still the Luftwaffe's hour to hurt. Daylight remains a proving ground. Tactics sharpen. RAF pilots are told to attack bombers head-on, where return fire is thin and psychology favors the man who does not blink. German crews hang charms and swear by routines. Within squadrons of the RAF, fatigue burns and is banked carefully. Rotation to 12 or 13 group, then back south to 11 where the work is. Losses come like weather. One day too heavy to think about, another day light enough to let a grin out. Churchill visits fields where blast pens still smoke and says the sentence that becomes the battle's epitaph and an adjective for courage. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The few are not only pilots, though the phrase will prefer their faces. The few include the ones with rakes at plotting tables and wrenches under wings, the ones who fed the network Dowding, drew an outline for, and a nation colored in. Arguments continue in offices while men strap on parachutes in dispersal huts. Park insists on preserving forces to fight again this afternoon. Liam Hallery insists that mass can do what attrition cannot. Dowding, increasingly isolated, faces critics who mistake his restraint for timidity. The victory his system has as good as secured will not secure him. He will be moved aside by winter, replaced by men whose manner suits Whitehall better. The machines he built, the network, the doctrine, will stay. That is the way of some victories. Their architects leave without statues, while their designs go on winning. And across the maps, in the corner where winter writes its own orders, the invasion slips from probability to fantasy. The Luftwaffe, hungry for results, swings deeper into the night. The Blitz will try to starve a city of sleep and steal it instead. The RAF will learn to fly in the dark with eyes borrowed from electronics. And in an office in the Reich Chancellery, a man who likes to choose his battlefield will decide to choose another. When Hitler signs Directive No. 21, in December 1940 Barbarossa, the air over London is still thick with engines at night, but the decision that will turn a European war into a world-eating fire is already ink on paper. The failure to subdue Britain has nudged, then shoved, strategy. The knock-on effects begin to line up like dominoes. Abandon the invasion of England. Try to bomb it into submission. If that fails, pivot east and hope that one Colossus's fall makes the other stagger. A chain of cause is not neat. The Luftwaffe did not lose because it had too few planes, and the RAF did not win because it had the nicer airplane in the Spitfire. Britain built more fighters than it lost. Germany misused the ones it had. The Dowding System multiplied the value of every pilot and every gallon of fuel. The Bf-109's range, the fragility of bomber escort doctrine, the German underestimation of radar and sector control, the Luftwaffe's lack of a heavy four-engined bomber fleet, and a leader's tether to the idea of quick decisions, all converged in the sky over Kent and London. Add to that the stubbornness of a people who refused the letter of capitulation to an enemy who offered them a chance to keep their empire in exchange for their soul, and you have an air battle that did more than keep the Union Jack from falling. It adjusted the axis of the war. On the ground in Britain, the winter after the battle tastes of sand, sack, dust, and tea slopped on steel. Night after night, sirens roll down the streets like a hand pushing through tall grass. Firefighters learn the geometry of collapsing walls. The auxiliary territorial serviceman searchlights and cooks and keeps everything moving for men whose hours are numbered by raids. The Blitz wrecks factories and breaks hearts, but it does not break production. Spitfires and Hurricanes come off lines in Castle Bromwich and elsewhere with a stubborn rhythm. Pilots leave training with hours barely warmed, and the sky makes them old again in a day. In Germany, the failure over Britain becomes a ghost in staff meetings. Gringu had told his Führer that England's air force would be crushed to fleks. The Luftwaffe looks for room to succeed and finds it in the Balkans and over Crete. Gliders and paratroops take islands at a cost that will convince Hitler to mothball airborne operations when he should have reconsidered his enemies instead. In the West, night raids continue on Britain, a siege by sound and flame. In the East, plans thick with arrows prepare to tear into the Soviet Union. The premise is familiar. Knock your enemy down quickly, and the rest of your problems will arrange themselves obediently. The lesson from the Channel, that some enemies do not fall in neat stages, hangs in the air like a caution no one writes down. The Battle of Britain has also changed the way Britain sees itself and will fight. Air superiority is no longer myth but habit. The RAV's Fighter Command keeps refining interception. Coastal Command and Bomber Command grow in ways that will define the next years. Finding submarines, striking factories and cities by night, arguing with the morality and the arithmetic of terror from above. American aid lend-lease rolls in. An island alone becomes an island connected, with American factories filling British hulls and British ideas migrating into American designs. When Pearl Harbor drags the United States into the war, the fact that Britain still stands with a functioning air defense and a working set of airfields becomes the precondition for everything that will follow in the West. Torch, Husky, Overlord. In a cold Ru-88 cockpit crossing the coast at night, a German navigator with frost on his chin calculates drift by a stopwatch and a pencil shaking in a gloved hand. The radio signals he uses are sharp enough to guide him to the banks of the Thames. The flak that greets him is bright enough to brand its pattern on his dreams. He has begun to fly with one truth always present. Without sunlight, he can hurt an enemy but not break him. In a warm control room under London, a WAAF plotter moves counters across a green table and looks up at a clock she will remember for the rest of her life. She and the man with the cigarette in his lips and the sleeves rolled up who directs squadrons and numbers can feel the edge dulling on the blade that sliced so close to the nation's throat in September. The strategic picture that emerges into 1941 and 1942 has the stamp of that autumn on it. Germany turns east into a campaign that its own air force cannot support the way doctrine assumes. The Luftwaffe is asked to escort, interdict, supply, and break cities across spaces so large that even victory in a battle becomes a milepost along a road that does not end. The RAF, secure at home by day, begins to send thousands of its own men into the dark in bombers that will measure sacrifice in tons dropped and tons burned. American daylight raids will add themselves to the arithmetic later, and the combined weight will in time grind the German war economy down. But the prerequisite for that pressure, a base, an ally, a sky you can use, was purchased in the late summer and early autumn of 1940. The Luftwaffe's strategic failure over Britain made all of that possible. If you want the hinge moment, you could pick the day when London's burning drew the Luftwaffe away from the sector stations that were holding the defense together thread by thread. Or you could choose one of those contrails over the city on September 15th, when a Heinkel fell in the suburbs and children crowded a fence to stare at metal that had frightened them from above the night before. Or maybe the hinge is quieter. A German staff officer advising caution being waved away by a boss who liked the smell of triumph. A British engineer adding relay redundancy to a radar set so a single blast wouldn't take it off the air. Strategy changes on the strength of small things sometimes. And back at the channel, those barges, the sea has an opinion. Autumn storms begin to roll through. Lines of invasion craft knock more urgently against pilings and rot slowly. The river barges that were dragged to the coast for a job they were not designed to do will spend the winter being repurposed, recommissioned, reconsidered. The order to sail will never leave a mouth because an air battle, fought by men whose world was often the span of a canopy and the circle of a propeller, made the order ridiculous. Walk out to one of the surviving radar towers on the English coast, all rivets and rust and patient angles, and stand beneath it. Listen for a sound you cannot hear anymore, the low hum of electrons being persuaded to reveal distance. Lay your hand on the iron and think about what happened when a nation built a nervous system and found that its backbone held. The Battle of Britain changed Hitler's strategy forever, not by destroying his armies or burning his cities, but by refusing to answer his premise, a war won by shock with the response he expected. Britain said no in the language of radio pulses, measured voices, and disciplined choices. That no forced choices of his own, away from an invasion he had imagined, into a bombing campaign that became punishment rather than policy. And then toward the east, where a war of annihilation would find the limits of his economy and the reach of his air force. The consequences radiate. Britain as a base for future liberation exists because no German boot stepped onto English shingle in 1940, American bombers in 1943, and 1944 could take off toward Germany because British fields were theirs and British radar made those fields viable. D-Day is a geography lesson that begins in the Dowding System's filter room. You cannot pile men and material along a coast and push them across a channel unless that coast is not under enemy air. It took 4 years to draw the line back across Europe. It would have taken forever without that first season. There is a human way to tell this too. A Polish pilot who lost his country and then regained the sky by fighting for someone else writes, "For freedom," on the side of his Hurricane in chalk, and when allowed, in paint. A WAAF plotter who slept in a narrow bunk under a corridor that sang with boots keeps a quiet pride for the rest of her life and tells no one until she is asked, because it seemed like simply doing what needed to be done. A German bomber radio operator who carried a St. Christopher in his pocket dies over Stepney and is buried with a cross a vicar could not refuse because the ground he fell into had been sanctified by suffering, and because some decencies stay even when bombs fly. This battle also gave the modern world a template, an integrated defense that fuses sensing, processing, decision, and action into something faster than any one human can be. Today we take for granted that a blip on a screen somewhere can move a machine toward another machine at the speed of electricity. That idea was born in rooms with chalk dust in the air and ashtrays that never emptied. The few were not few. They were many, composed into one shape. And then the caution. Strategy often learns its lessons too late. Hitler's insistence on night terror over cities, rather than continued pressure on fighter command's nerve centers, gave Britain time to heal. His disdain for radar ensured that a technology could grow in the shadow of his arrogance. His need to move, to keep the war's narrative flowing, pushed him east into distances that made the Luftwaffe's tactical brilliance a candle in a storm. You can feel the hinge in those decisions. You can also feel how close it ran. The days in late August when sector stations burned. The afternoons when pilots landed to find their dispersal huts toothpicked into the grass and taxied out again through smoke. What do we do with this now? We refuse to simplify. We teach that courage lives in the cockpit and on the plotting table, in the fire station, and the factory floor. We remember that strategy is made of logistics and weather, and people not giving up. We tell our children that when someone promises a quick victory, ask them about the radar, about the fuel range, about the men and women whose work is so ordinary that it becomes invisible. We visit the museums where Bentley Priory's maps are preserved under glass, and the hangars where Spitfires and Hurricanes stretch their wings like swans. We read the names on the memorial at Cape Le Fern and understand that the few contained multitudes, Poles, New Zealanders, Canadians, Czechs, Irish, South Africans, Americans who couldn't wait for their country to join. And we imagine, sometimes, the other version. Imagine if the Luftwaffe had kept its fist on the sector stations, if it had believed the evidence of its own successes in late August and September, rather than chasing the theater of a burning city. Imagine if Sea Lion had launched anyway, barges nose to tail, 109 circling above with tanks nearly dry, the Royal Navy coming out of its harbors with a look very hard to argue with. History did not choose that path. It chose one where an air battle, fought on a schedule set by weather and radar, and the rate at which hands could load ammunition belts, closed one door and opened another far larger and far more terrible. The Thames runs exactly as it did then. The island seems smaller now, not because it is, but because the planes that fill skies can cross oceans without thinking about it. In the summer, people picnic on cliffs where once men scanned for specks. In winter, gulls hang in winds that pilots once wrestled for minutes that felt like lives. A strategy changed here. An invasion turned into a myth. And because of that, a continent one day learned how to heal.